Hello, we're live. Welcome to Cinema Savvy. Happy Halloween, and welcome back to a brand new movie review or movie discussion. In this instance, I'm Chris Garner, joined today with the disembodied voice of my friend, who is Mark. And we are going to be discussing the Saw franchise. We're going to be talking from Saw 1 all the way up until Saw 7, or Saw 3D, or Saw the Final Chapter, whatever you want to call it. Ahead of our review for Jigsaw, which we'll be doing sometime on Friday. I think we still haven't seen that movie. But this has just been a series of films that we have wanted to talk about for a hell of a long time. I know I have on the channel anyway, because the Saw franchise is probably, without a doubt, like one of my favorite film series of all time. And that feels really weird to say, but it definitely does hold a very special place in my heart. It's a very nostalgic series to me. And what better time to do these reviews ahead of a new Saw film after 7 years? So as I've said, we haven't seen the new one. We haven't seen Jigsaw yet. We'll be seeing that later this week. So please, no spoilers in the comments or anything like that. This is purely going to be a discussion for the first 7 films. Mark, how are you tonight?
Good, mate. You?
Yeah, I'm doing good, thanks. We have a lot of movies to discuss. We have a lot of things to talk about. So
a lot of problems, a lot of good things, a lot of bad things.
Yes, and you've actually joined me on the we did a reaction to the Jigsaw trailer that came out. I was actually surprised that we didn't get like a bunch of trailers for that movie. We really only got the one that ever came out. And we kind of talked about our history with the Saw franchise, but just go into it a little bit more in depth. Sort of our history of Saw and how we got into it ourselves.
Well, yeah. We went for that stage of when we were in sixth form of being underage, so we were never actually able to go on. My earliest memories is me and you watching the worst copy of Saw 6 we can find.
No, it was Saw 5. It was Saw 5.
I saw it was Saw 5, but then we got Saw 6 in the next year because he was still too young to be able to watch it.
Yeah, and
I know we were plotting and planning everything we could to try and get.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, I was a long time back. I think we've got a bit of lag between us. I'm not sure how much lag we've got, but hopefully it will sort itself out as we get into the review. For me, I watched the first Saw film probably. It was when Saw 3 was about to come out in cinemas, I think. No, it was when Saw 4 was about to come out. So that would have been in 2007, I think. I watched it for the first time. Basically, I used to go around my next door neighbor's house who had an older brother, and he collected horror films, essentially. So I was watching a lot of films that I probably shouldn't have been watching at the time that I did. And I think it was just like a blind choice. Like, we just picked Saw 1 one time. The cover kind of intrigued us as well because it's the severed foot under like a UV light. We put it on, and I'll never forget it. And we'll talk about it more. We'll go into Saw 1 in a minute. But watching that film for the first time, especially when it gets to the ending, I remember my jaw hitting the ground. I didn't see it coming at all. And I was just, after that film, completely in love with that first film. And then I realized that there were all these sequels that were out, and Saw 2 and Saw 3 were out at that point. As I said, Saw 4 was about to come into the cinemas that October. I think I watched it probably in the summertime. I got home that night and I found Saw 2 on the internet. I watched it. I loved it. I was engrossed in this story now. I got to Saw 3. Loved that as well, and I was like, oh my god, we're 3 for 3 at the moment. And then from then on, I was hyped for 4, couldn't get to the cinema, hyped for 5, couldn't get to the cinema, and that unfortunately continued all the way through the franchise. By the time we turned 18, Saw the Final Chapter had come out, and there were no more Saw movies until now. So this is going to be a first for us when we go and see Jigsaw on Friday. This will be the first Saw movie that we get to see in the theater, so that is going to be a great experience. But yes, just Saw in general, like not just like for us individually, like for me and you at school, this was like a big cornerstone of our friendship. This was like something we talked about. This was a series that, you know, we'd kind of guess what was going to happen. We'd come up with our own ideas. We were speculating on what was going to happen with the characters, what new traps there were going to be. We were in it, you know, we were really into this series, and I'm kind of just really glad that it's back now. Say what you want about Saw 3D, and oh boy, we will say what we think about that movie when we get to it in our discussion, but I'm glad that it's back. I think there was a slogan as well, wasn't there, that it's not Halloween unless it's Saw, and I kind of agree with that. So I think
Instant feels.
instant. It is. It really is like a sense of nostalgia, and it's so weird because if we're going to talk about horror in general, and I'm not even sure if you could qualify the Saw films as horror films. I guess you kind of can. I've always seen them as more of thriller films because I've never been
Gore.
yeah, like the whole torture porn thing, like people always say this spawned that whole thing with like Hostel that came out and all those other films that came out after it. But I was never really into Saw for the traps. Like the traps are fine, they're a staple of the franchise. I loved the story and like how you'd get sequels into it. You'd get to like Saw 5 or Saw 6, and you'd be getting flashbacks that lead directly into Saw 1. And it will change the way you see things in those earlier movies. And it really was this big interconnecting story. And yes, it did get to some stages where it got really over the top. Like, how could one person plan all of these things ahead of time and watch it all fall into place? But when you're like 5, 6 movies in, you just kind of go along with it in the end. And that's what I like about the films. They are really unique. So with all that being said, I think we should just get into the first film now. Now, as I said, this will be immensely spoiler-filled, so if you've never seen the Saw films, please go away and at least watch Saw 1, even if you don't want to watch the rest of them, because I don't know if you agree, but Saw 1 is probably my favourite of the series.
Yeah, the best. Easy, by far.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people would say that it's the one that felt, well, obviously, because it was the first one, it was fresh, it was new, I think it probably has the most tight-knit story out of all of them. It essentially more or less takes place in one location, at least for most of the film. And it's just this really great unfolding psychological thriller. It doesn't rely on gore. There is gore in the film, but it's kept very much off camera. You don't really see much of it. It's more implied violence, and I think that's why I like this one a bit more than the other ones. But yeah, so the plot for Saw 1, for anyone who doesn't know, 2 strangers who awaken in a room with no recollection of how they got there soon discover their pawns in a deadly game perpetrated by a notorious serial killer. So Saw 1 was actually kind of a brainchild of Lee Whannell and James Wan, who were film students, and they made a short film which was called Saw, which came out in 2003, which was the reverse bear trap, and they made that as a short film, and then I guess that got picked up by a studio. They got it made into a feature length, and then that became Saw. And then that scene is obviously probably one of the most iconic scenes out of the entire franchise in that first movie. So what do you take away from the first Saw film then? If we go into the characters a bit more now, do you like that setup, more of it being in one room compared to the group traps that you get more or less in the sequels?
I think I would take it, but the suspense in when they're trying to guess why they're there, the different things through the tapes that they're being led to believe, like each other.
Yeah.
If you think why they're working together, it builds the suspense. Yeah, there's mystery in there. There's a lot of plot holes in there.
See, this is interesting because you've watched all 7 ahead of this. I'm going off my memory, so if my memory's a little hazy on some of the films as we get later into the discussion, I apologize for that. But yeah, you've been messaging me on Facebook saying, like, dude, I've just watched Saw 1. There are so many plot holes in there.
Yeah, I mean, just literally the start. What if he'd have just got that key straight away?
Yeah, so some context for anyone who hasn't seen it. The opening shot of the film is a guy called Adam, who's a photographer, and he wakes up in a bathtub, and there's a shot of the key falling down the plug hole. And you really don't understand the significance of the key until you get to the very end of the film, and even kind of in Saw 3 as well. You get a flashback that links back to the setup of that trap as well. Basically, the whole plot of the film hinges on this key that was in the bathtub with Adam. If it hadn't have gone down the plug hole, he could have used at any point to unlock his chains and walk out immediately. If that's the case, and if that was an option, then I don't understand how the game could unfold. Like, Dr. Gordon would be left in the bathroom, on his own. He'd have no way to complete his game unless there'd be a separate game if that happened, if Jigsaw planned it all out ahead of time. it is a film that kind of does fall apart if you do think about it too much. So you have to think about it a little bit to try and uncover the mystery, but not too much to the point where the whole film just like falls under its own weight.
Another one that I literally was thinking about just off the top of my head then is obviously John Kramer is lying there, and obviously another spoiler, and he obviously awakens at the end.
Mm.
But if Lawrence Gordon is a doctor, as he says he is, why would he not confirm that that body is dead by way of checking the pulse? Because he could reach that foot, he could have pulled him closer, could have done anything he wanted.
I guess when you're in that situation, though, right? And the makeup did look really effective on him. Like it was like very cinematic makeup. Obviously, it was a film, but even in the context of him setting it up, it was great makeup. I guess they just had to believe it, right? And then in Saw 3, you find out that he injected himself with a muscle relaxant to slow his heart rate and relax his muscles. So I can kind of let that one slide. What we need to talk about, though, is
so glad they didn't throw anything at them.
There's a great video on the there's a great video on the internet called His He How It Should Have Ended, and they did one on the first Saw movie. That's a really funny video, and I think something like that happens. I think they shoot the gun and it like bounces all around the room and then hits Jigsaw in the middle of the room and he wakes up. But actually, speaking of Jigsaw, I think we need to talk about him because this movie introduced us to Jigsaw and indeed like the Billy the Puppet. Funny story about that, actually. We'll talk about that later involving that puppet. But this is like one of the most iconic horror mascots now. Like, sure, you have your Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Leatherface, Chucky, all that kind of stuff. But really, after this first Saw film, maybe even after the second, they really cemented this puppet as a staple of horror iconography now, which is really cool because, I mean, you dressed up as the puppet one time for Halloween.
I was him last year.
Yeah, and just like the whole image that Saw has created, like not just the traps, but in terms of its characters, especially with Jigsaw. And without a question of a doubt in this whole series, and he's not in this first film all that much, but Tobin Bell, my God, is by far the walk-away standout of this entire franchise. He is the best actor out of all of them by far. Every time he's on screen, you're completely invested in his way of thinking and his psychology. And as the sequels go on, you learn more and more about his backstory and what happened to make him become the Jigsaw killer as we see at the beginning of the film. I think the first film was shot in about 18 days. So if you think about that, that's a really quick turnaround for that film. And essentially, Tobin Bell was just turning up to work every day, just lying on that floor. And I think someone asked in an interview, like, was that really tough? And he was like, well, it kind of was, but, you know, that was my role. That was my job as an actor. I showed up. I did what I had to do. So absolutely fair play to him for this first movie because that couldn't have been easy.
Yeah, I blame him. You think it's going to be an easy job lying there all day, but I suppose
yes. But the one thing, yeah, absolutely. And the first Saw film, and I watched it a couple of months ago. I still think it completely holds up, but I'd say at this point now, it's a lot more tongue-in-cheek. You've got Cary Elwes in there playing Dr. Gordon, and sort of his back and forth with Lee Whannell. The script isn't great. The acting is probably even less than great. Especially, I think the acting really starts to go downhill from the two, especially from Gordon, where he reaches that point where he's got nothing left and he starts going hysterical and he starts hyperventilating and screaming. That's where you kind of laugh at the film because he's going really over the top with it and you don't believe it. But actually, probably the best actor in the film behind Tobin Bell is the little girl who plays is Gordon's daughter, who I know I've seen in the film before. I think it was Sin City, but I can't place it. All the stuff with she is by far the walk-away actor in this film. You got some cool side characters as well in this one. You've got Danny Glover as Detective Tapp, and his partner who is in Lost. And also, speaking of Lost, which is one of my favorite TV series, the character of Zepp, who is sort of like framed as the bad guy through most of this film. You think he's the Jigsaw killer up until the very end. He was in Lost as well, so I guess this was probably one of the first things he ever did. And I've forgotten his name now, so I really hate myself for that. So I'm going to check that on Wikipedia right now. Do you have anything else you want to say about the first Saw movie?
Favorite trap out of the Saw's first one. What would you say?
It's a cliche to say the reverse bear trap, isn't it? But it really probably is. Yeah, I'd say it's the reverse bear trap just because it's so like iconic to the franchise. It comes up multiple times, especially towards the end. And it's just a really cool setup. The worst trap in the entire film for me. Are we counting that drill chair one with the guy?
See, I would agree with you on that. However, I have to keep thinking that candle one. It literally makes no sense.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So there's a trap in the film where a guy, I think it's something like, wasn't he like pretending to be sick or something like that and claiming loads of benefits, I think is the setup. And he says, like, let's see how many more people you'll burn with your lies or something like that. So he's basically naked. He's covered in a flammable substance with nothing but a candle for light. He's got a fast-acting poison in his system. There's broken glass on the floor that he has to walk around on. There's a safe in the middle with an antidote, and the combination to the safe is written on a series of numbers literally all the way around the entire room, probably on the ceiling as well. I don't get where you even start with that combination. Like, there's going to be a sequence of numbers, but is there a start point? Is this the first number you have to program in? Because if you're going to try and get like a combination of like 3 digits out of all those numbers, there's going to be like billions of possibilities that you're never going to get.
Yeah.
So I mean,
it's a lot of effort to go, isn't it? To write all those numbers all over the wall, though.
I'd probably just like burn myself right from the off just to get it over with. It just seems really impossible. And this is also at the point where you have to say that Jigsaw, because they make a point of this through most of the films, that he's not inherently a killer. Like, he finds other ways for his victims to kill themselves. And that is fine up until a point, but also one of your plot holes is that Dr. Gordon has got to kill Adam as part of his test. In order to complete his game, he's got to kill Adam. So essentially, he is forcing people to kill each other. So technically, he is still a killer because he isn't given them the option where both of them could survive.
Yep, agreed. But also, he doesn't actually kill Adam. So even though he cuts his own foot off and gets out, as like you get to the flashback in, I think it's Saw 7 or Saw 6.
Yeah.
He still hasn't actually killed Adam because, as we know, Amanda Young killed Adam.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So he did actually fail his test, Dr. Gordon, even though he did chop his own foot off, which is commendable, but...
Yeah, because he gives him the time limit, doesn't he? And say, like, he has to complete it by 6 o'clock, and he doesn't. So technically, he's failed it. I guess it's a more compassionate side to Jigsaw. Let's talk about the twist ending really quickly then, if we haven't given it away already. So throughout the entire film, there's a guy lying on the floor. You don't think anything of it, and then by the end of it, you figure out that the guy who you thought was the villain throughout the entire film actually turns out to be another subject in Jigsaw's game. The guy steps up off the floor, and the guy in the middle of the room the entire time was actually Jigsaw. Do you think this was a good twist ending on viewing it again, even though you know the ending? Do you think it's still up?
It's just one of those open mouth things. The first time you watch, oh my God, I can't believe that. I would never have guessed it.
Yeah.
It is a good ending. Every single film seems to set up for the next one, really, doesn't it?
Definitely after this. I'd say definitely from Saw 2, they seem to all take place within a very short time frame of one another. I'm not really sure how much time passes between Saw 1 and Saw 2. What was I going to say? So yeah, with the twist ending, I mean, the only real setup that we get for the whole ending with Jigsaw is that one really quick scene. It's like a blink and you'll miss it, where Dr. Gordon's about to perform on a patient. He's giving some kind of seminar or talk to some new medical students, and he says, like, this is John Kramer. He's got an inoperable frontal lobe tumor. And then Zepp comes in and says, like, he's a very interesting person, this Kramer guy or something, Dr. Gordon. And that's basically it. Do you think we needed more of a setup to make that twist ending a little bit more? Because it kind of seems like, oh, yeah, it was that guy in the bed. and nothing much more than that. Do you think we needed more scenes with him, or do you think that would have made the twist too obvious when you get to the end?
I think that kind of develops his, not knowing so much about him in the first leads to more intrigue, obviously, in the second, and you develop more of his character with him. And I think Saw 1 was perfect. I think it's just enough, really, and it sets it up perfectly for the second, and you get more intrigued in his character just from that.
Yeah.
And then as you get to like the third, the fourth, the fifth, where they're doing flashback to the first, where he's setting this trap up, and you literally get to that stage thinking, wow, it's actually cleverer than you think.
Yeah.
But I think it's just a matter of time that he's in it. It's the right amount of time.
Yeah, I agree with that. What we'll do is when we get to the end, we'll probably rank all our Saw films from favourite to least favourite, but we've already said that this is probably our favourite one. I would have loved to have seen James Wan come back to direct some of the later ones. I know he served as a producer on, I think, at least the first three. He's probably been involved with all of them, though, as like an executive producer. But I guess we can move on to Saw 2 now. Then we've got a lot of movies to talk about, so we need to move through them relatively quickly. So 1 year later, we get Saw 2, this time directed by Darren Lynn Bousman, whatever you want to call him. And this is our guy who pretty much sticks with the series now until Saw 4. And he definitely brings his own unique style to it. It feels in keeping with the first film. But the first film, when it obviously just being the first thing, it was made as almost like a little independent movie, like a little low-budget movie. It feels like that. This one feels like it's definitely had a lot more money put into it. It seems a little bit more slicker as well in terms of the editing and the style, which sort of carries on throughout all the rest of the films up to this point. Yeah, so Saw 2 is a weird one. So I've met people who think that Saw 2 is their favorite one. And if it is, that's absolutely fair enough. But I won't say this is where the series went downhill, because I do love most of these films, apart from 7 and elements of 5. But this is where it introduced the whole group trap thing. Group trap scenario, I guess, is the best word for it. And as such, you really don't get as much time to develop the characters. You get like a little bit, but you never really get enough. You're essentially just watching a bunch of people lined up for the meat grinder, which I guess you could say for any of the Saw movies. But with the first movie, you've essentially got 2 characters, and they're in it through pretty much the entire way through all the film. And you get to know them. They go into the flashbacks of them more. They feel like more fleshed out characters. When you've got a 90-minute movie and you've got a group of about 6 or 7 people, and you've also got to establish the new character of Eric Matthews and Jigsaw and Kerry, it feels like there's too many ingredients, and as such, you don't really get to know the characters as much. So therefore, I kind of don't care about it as much. I don't know if you had the same thing with this one.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a few issues with it. I like some of the characters, and I think one thing that annoys me most of all is, obviously, spoiler alert, they're in a house, they're all locked in there. There's a nerve agent coming through. We know this. The annoying thing that my biggest plot hole is why does this nerve agent affect the bigger guys more than smaller guys? So say Eric Matthews' son, in this whole film, he doesn't really seem to be affected by this nerve agent gas.
Yeah.
You see the others, you see the big hard dude and the African American guy, and they're coughing up blood, and he's just not. Him and Amanda, obviously. Spoiler alert: Amanda, Jigsaw's accomplice. But yeah, my other biggest issue is the character who plays Obi. Obviously, comes out in the fact that he helped kidnap them. However, why did he not wake up? Question: if he helped, why is he in there himself?
Yeah. That's one of the problems I have with this one. And I kind of have a similar problem with Saw 5 when we get to it, is that the most interesting characters in the group scenarios always tend to die off really early on. And by far out of the entire group, Obi is by far the most interesting one. I mean, I love Amanda, but obviously she gets developed a whole lot in this one and in Saw 3. And even kind of when we get to Saw 6 as well, she gets another bit of development there. But no, I loved Obi. He was a really mysterious character. You wanted to get to know him more. You wanted to know, as you just said, why he was kidnapping people. Could have possibly been like another accomplice to Jigsaw, maybe. But he's killed off. I think he's like the second one to die, isn't he? The first one accidentally turns the key in the door with the gun on the other side, so we get shot through the head. And then I think the next guy to go is Obi in the oven trap.
Yep, that's right.
It just seems like a real big missed opportunity. And a lot of these characters I hate. I mean, Xavier's character, you're meant to hate anyway. He's got no dimension to him at all. He's just the bad guy, beginning to end. He's an absolute dick to everyone, out for himself, and there's literally nothing else to his character. There's no moment where he changes, he has a change of heart or anything like that. He's just a really boring one-note character. The guy who turns the key in the door, you pretty much don't get to know anyway. Who else? You've got the blonde-haired girl as well, who's like probably affected with the nerve agent the most throughout the film. Is it?
I mean, the most effective she does in the whole thing is point out that X marks the spot.
Yes,
that's the only real thing she does in the whole trap.
Really,
I mean, the most annoying thing is the traps in that, because you'd expect in a house that they would all have their own trap, where you don't really see a lot of the house. You see 3 traps at best.
Mm-hmm.
So the needle, the oven, and obviously the one that dipshit at the end.
There's the one where she puts her wrists through with the razor blades that cuts her hands. Yeah.
Whereas if they worked as a team, they could have pushed those blades away.
Yeah, or even if she like put one hand through and then realized that it was stuck, she could like use the other hand to like kind of move the blades apart. And I mean, she would have still got her hand cut a little bit, but she would have been able to get it out a lot more easily. There's just loads of
she puts her other hand in.
I know, right?
But anyone who knows an American house knows they're not built out of brick. He tries to smash the door down, realises it's metal bars. If he would have thought logically, you hit the wall. It's drywall. You're literally going to get through. It's a bit of wood, bit of drywall, bit of stucco, or whatever they pronounce it as. You'd think you'd be able to get through that wall, wouldn't you?
This is what you have to go with, though. Like, we get to Saw 5, and Jigsaw has that monologue, like, if you're good at anticipating the human mind, it leaves nothing to chance. It's a bit of a stretch, though, in situations like this, that he knew that they would be, they wouldn't be smart enough to break through the wall, and they just go for the door or something like that. I don't know. I still like Saw 2. I think it's a solid sequel. It's obviously nowhere near as good as the first one. This, for me, and this is right off the opening scene, really. This is where the traps kind of take over from the story. Now, don't get me wrong. I still love the story as it goes on. But there's definitely a greater focus on the gore in this one and the shock value of that. And then this constant case of we need to try and one-up ourselves in every sequel, really. And I think that's really kick-started off with the opening scene in this film with the Venus fly trap, like the man in the iron mask kind of thing.
That's my favourite trap of the whole thing. But
it's yeah.
Yeah, you can't fault that one, really. Let's move on quickly to the twist at the end.
Yeah.
So obviously Jigsaw's sitting down with Eric Matthews, and he literally tells him he needs to sit still for 2 hours. One thing he's never really been able to do.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, he lets his, head kind of cloud his judgment and kick the living shit out of Jigsaw to the point he has to drag him and tell him where it is. Where if he would have just sat there, he'd have realised that his son was 5 feet away from him in a safe, literally safe and sound, to quote the film.
I did love that. I did like that play on with that. Actually, there's really 2 twists in this film, because the first one is you could argue 3 if you're going with the Obi one, but that's really not played as a twist. So you've got the fact that the video that you're watching isn't the video that the SWAT team is watching isn't live, and it's actually happened like hours ago. That's really the first twist in the film. And the second one is that one, and then I guess the third one is the Amanda twist at the end, right? So there's kind of like a whole series of twists towards the end of this one. You mentioned Eric Matthews there, though, and I guess we should mention him because he is quite a prominent character, at least for the next couple of films in the series. Played by Donnie Wahlberg, probably the less successful Wahlberg twin, with him and Mark Wahlberg. What do you think of his character in these films, especially this one? Because this is the one where he gets the most to do. Do you like him as a character, or do you think he's a bit one note?
He's a good character. I'd like to see him develop a bit more. However, he went into what you would expect him to do. He just went. He did his old mental self, and he wanted his son back, which probably what most people would do.
Hmm.
However, you learn more about him in the next couple of
Yeah,
films, and you're eager to see if he's alive. And skip it, or you think, what a shit way to end, really.
yeah, yeah. I'll agree with that. There's a couple of things I want to talk in Saw 2. So we've mentioned Amanda, continuing her character from her not cameo, but she gets probably the most iconic scene in the first Saw film with the reverse bear trap. She's in this one prominently now. I love Shawnee Smith. I really like her in Saw 3, actually. We'll get to that in a minute. But I like a character in this. In each film, she seems to be very, very different. She plays Amanda in a very different way, which keeps the character feeling fresh, although she is inherently the same character. She's a really, really messed up character. Oh, wow. Okay. We have limited time on this discussion, I've just announced. So we'll rattle through this quickly. I really like Shawnee Smith in this film and Tobin Bell in this one as well, because in the first one, he's just kind of highlighted as the Jigsaw killer. You really don't get to know him all that much. This one, you really start to get an insight into his backstory, and he essentially just sits behind a desk the entire film, talking to Eric Matthews. But again, Tobin Bell is the walk away in this. Like, he is by far the best actor in this entire franchise. He keeps you glued to the, like, on the edge of your seat, listening to like his way of thinking, and he's just a really interesting character. And this is where we get insight into his backstory. We learn that when he got, you know, when he was told that he had cancer, he tried to commit suicide by driving his car off a cliff. He survived the wreckage, pulled himself out, and then this kind of gave him this new way of thinking. And I guess at that point in the franchise, they thought, boom, that's as much backstory as we need. We learn even more about his backstory when we get to Saw 4, which I really like what they do with that character. But I guess they were writing these as they went along. I don't know if they had a plan, but it's kind of neat how it all worked out eventually when we get even more backstory of him in Saw 4, and then you link it back to Saw 2. It does feel like a jigsaw, like it does feel all interconnected, like they have had a somewhat of a plan from the beginning of these films.
Agreed. We'll be on Saw 3 now.
Yeah, we can move to Saw 3. So you've got like 10 minutes on this. So I don't know if we're going to be able to cover all these films in 10 minutes. So I'm just going to have to take the reins on my own. I've called it like 1 to 7 discussions. So I'm just going to have to like go on and just finish it. But that's absolutely fine. Saw 3 is probably the big one. And to a lot of people, this is where a lot of people jump ship after this one. Some people see the Saw films as a trilogy. And I can kind of see where they're coming from because massive, massive spoiler alert. Jigsaw dies at the end of this movie. How can you continue the franchise with the main antagonist being killed, right? Well, they find a way. But
yeah, flashbacks. Lots and lots of flashbacks.
What do you think of Saw 3 then? So if you go into your opinions on this, and then I'll come out.
Saw 3 at the time was really one of my favourites. I won't lie, I really enjoyed Saw 3. There's some really good traps in there. I mean, you've got the likes of the Rack, which is one of Jigsaw's actually announced personal favourite.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you've got the Pig That. One of the worst ones in there, I have to say, is probably the Ice one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a pathetic attempt to get a key. What else have we got in there? I mean, the little twist at the end that his daughter's alive,
mm-hmm.
which kind of brings you back then, well, into it at the end of Saw 4, I believe. Or is it Saw 5? Not actually too sure. But yeah, so there's some really good elements of Saw 3 that kind of sets up for some of the others. You've got your likes of the Amanda's letter.
Mm-hmm.
Why does Amanda shoot Lynn? The really, really gruesome bit where she performs his brain surgery and you hear that little clunk of the drill on his skull. Yeah, you've got little bits like that, but it's a really good film. I like it. It kind of pieces well with Jeff and kind of develops him as character and how he keeps it from Amanda that it's Lynn's husband, and it gives you that bit at the start where they're fitting out like she wants a divorce, and he kind of sets it all up to be quite a dramatic ending, and this is what you get, really, isn't it? And that leads on and has consequences for the next films, and yeah.
Yeah,
What do
no,
you think?
the guy who plays Jeff in this, as soon as I saw him, he's put on a lot of weight since I last saw him, but I'm always going to see him as Robert the Bruce from Braveheart. Like, he plays a major role in that film, and I can't see him from anything else. So every time I watch Saw 3, I'm like, that's Robert the Bruce from Braveheart. Yeah, I remember watching Saw 3 for the first time, and I think it was actually my least favorite one. If you're going to look at like Saw 1, 2, and 3, I really didn't like it as much, and I couldn't put my finger on it why. I really didn't like Jeff as a character. They try and chalk him up as this sympathetic character where his son was hit in a hit and run accident, was killed, and he's got this daughter, but he kind of neglects her now because he's still dealing from the grief of his son. And, you know, he's divorced, everything like that. He's just completely miserable. But I didn't like the character. I didn't like how he played it. Yes, he's very vengeful, but he never seems to learn anything. And that's kind of the point when you get to the end of the film. But I don't like characters that don't learn anything. They don't really go on any kind of journey at the end of the film. And I guess he has to live with that consequence. We think this until we get to Saw 4, because I really don't like what they did with the Jeff character in Saw 4, but we'll get to that. Well, I might get to that if we continue this video on after this. But on reflection, I really do like this film, and I can see why some people do view it as the last one if they don't want to continue it, although it does leave some questions unanswered, like the wax that he pours on the cassette tape isn't revealed. What happens with that until Saw 4? This one, I think, when it came out, was actually banned, or it wasn't. I think it was given like a, what is it, NC-17 rating, which is even higher than an 18 rated certificate. And I know they had to cut a lot of material out of it to get it to an 18 certificate, even with the Extreme Edition. Originally in the film, when Amanda's talking about the fate of Eric Matthews and what happened to him, the last scene we see of them together is where they're fighting in the corridor. She walks off, and then he kind of like jeers after her, "You're not Jigsaw, bitch," and that's it. In the original version, which was filmed, she went back with a knife and stabbed him brutally to death, killing Eric Matthews there and there. I guess they wanted to leave it open-ended, and eventually when they bring him into it with Saw 4 as well. So really, my review of this film comes down to, I really don't like the Jeff stuff, but I really like the Jigsaw and especially the Amanda stuff. I really, really like what they do with Amanda in this one. She has... To see her transformation from the character she was in Saw 2 to what she is now, like appearance-wise, everything, she's just completely changed. I mean, it's still Shawnee Smith playing her, but she definitely is a lot more unhinged, extreme, indoctrinated into this idea. But by the end of the film, although she's like a cold-hearted bitch all the way through the entire film, you do kind of feel sorry for her. Like, she's definitely dealing with a lot of trauma. Probably not helped by all the traps that Jigsaw's put her in. And she's having this turmoil, like she sees Jigsaw as this father figure. There are even parts of it where you could argue that she sees him as more of that, like more of a lover, which is really creepy when she sees Lynn getting very close to him, for example. And she has that look. It's a very jealous look that she has. But I think it's more of a guardian. I think it's more of like a sort of mentor, guardian figure, and he's sort of like falling out of favor with her. Which takes us to one of my favorite, well, probably without a question of a doubt, my favorite scene in the film, which is the flashback to them setting the trap for Saw 1 in the bathroom. And with the whole key going down the plug hole, we see that Amanda just kind of casually throws the key in there, which is why it went down the plug hole, which is why Adam never had a chance to escape, which really plays into Amanda's MO with this film, in that she doesn't give her subjects a chance to survive. She puts them in inescapable traps, and that's not okay with Jigsaw. And that's really the entire crux of the film, at least from Jigsaw and Amanda's perspective.
What I was going to say about... so what's your personal favourite trap from
Saw 3? Is this the one that has the most traps in? Like, you get about 10 minutes in this film, and it feels like you've gone through 3 different traps already. My favorite trap probably has to be the rack, because it's still, without a doubt, probably to me the most brutal one out of them all. I don't like compound fractures. I don't like breaking bones. And to see someone's arms being twisted all the way around, then their legs, then their head, that is absolutely gross to me. It's really hard to watch every single time. I think in this one they go really over the top with them, though. Like, you've got the whole rib cage one with Kerry. It's really unfortunate that they killed Kerry as well. I mean, I would have loved to have seen her be one of the main characters in one of these Saw films. I think she would have been great.
Doesn't she die in Saw 4?
No, she dies in this one by Amanda. Then they find her body again in Saw 4.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, they go through he goes through the door.
You've got the guy in the classroom trap with all the chains in him, with one through his mouth. You've got Eric Matthews when he has to break his ankle in a horrible fashion at the beginning of this film to get out of the chains. The pig vat, the freezer room trap, the shotgun trap, the rack. There's so much. You could even argue the shotgun collar that Lynn has around her is like essentially a trap. There's loads in this film. There's too many to count. And then we get to the end of the film where Jigsaw dies. Do you think it was a good move killing Jigsaw in this film, or do you think they should have like kept him hanging on? Although the guy's got terminal cancer, so I don't know how many sequels you could have got out of him realistically. You know what I mean?
I mean, yeah, they had to kind of kill him at the end to kind of end the Jeff situation and to bring like full circle to the shotgun collar.
Yeah.
So I think he needed to die at that point, because you couldn't really in the next Saw, because obviously the Saw 4 starts with him on the table on the morgue, and obviously during which he swallows a tape. Swallows, but women do better.
Nice. And you've just pissed off all of our female viewers right there, Mark. Thank you.
I'm really, really sorry.
But you're not really.
Not really. But yeah, if you killed him at the start of Saw 4, you can't really go from him dying to him being straight on the morgue, and then you've got Saw 5, which got snippets of between the Saw 3 and Saw 4. If you don't do it where he dies in Saw 3, I think it would just upset the whole rhythm of the series, and you wouldn't be able to do it as they've done it.
I guess how it's split up now as well, like you could look at it as the first 3 films of the Jigsaw trilogy. The next 4 films you could argue are like the Hoffman quadrilogy. And then, I mean, we haven't seen Jigsaw now, so this could be like the Legacy trilogy. Like, if it is a copycat killer, whatever it happens to be, this might be setting up for another trilogy now, another series. So I do like how they've sort of structured it. But yeah, I guess you've got to take off now, right? Because you said you've got to go at 1:30.
Yeah, just quickly before I go, obviously, I've had my point of view. So if I had to rate my Saw experience in order of films, I'd probably say 1, 2, 3. Then I liked 5, 4, 6, and 7. It's got to feature the worst character in the world for the worst testing, the worst game player in the world, Bobby Dagan. Literally words cannot describe how much he's such a crap character.
See, I didn't even remember his name until you brought it up before we hit record. So that's going to be fun when I talk about Saw 3D.
It's just because I watched it recently, but one thing I am going to say, just because I know me and you share this on common grounds, Betsy Russell for someone in her 50s.
Oh, without a question of a doubt, mate. Absolutely.
The scene in Saw 7, the train scene, can't fault it. As a character, I think she's a good character as well. She plays his wife well. Wasn't someone you would put with Jigsaw as a wife, but I think she does it well.
I will disagree with you. I think Betsy Russell is absolutely fucking dreadful playing the role of Jill Tuck, his wife. But if you're looking at it purely from an aesthetic purpose, then absolutely.
I think I'm kind of clouded by my judgment of the aesthetic looks, to be honest.
Yeah, you absolutely are.
My eyes wasn't on her acting, if that makes sense.
Wow. So are we going to have to leave you now? I'm going to have to
take off now. I wish I could stay and do the rest.
I'm going to have to finish what you started. I'm going to have to continue your legacy and your work and continue it on with my discussion of Saw 4, 5, 6, and 7. So I
The
guess
only
I'll.
way to end this correctly is by saying game over.
And you're just going to hang up. So right after that. Thanks for jumping on with me, Mark. It's been good to talk about the Saw films. Hopefully we can talk a little bit about the ones that we've missed tonight when we get to Jigsaw. But yeah, roll on Friday when we get to see that, right?
Yep. See you all on Friday.
Awesome. Cheers, man. See ya. Right, guys, so you've got me now. I'm not sure how well I'm going to do on my own, but we're going to power through. We're going to talk Saw 4, 5, 6, and 7. While I'm talking about this now, get commenting as well. Anyone watching, have you seen the Saw films? Which one's your favorite? Have you seen Jigsaw? Anything Saw related, do get commenting, because it'll be good to go to the comments section in a minute and get some comments that you guys are firing at me. Any questions about the series or anything like that? So we move on to Saw 4, which came out in 2007. So I mentioned at the beginning of this review that this was the one that was about to come out when I just got into the Saw film. So I'd watched Saw 1, 2, and 3, and then I had the long waiting game of waiting for Saw 4 to come out. Loved the ending of Saw 3, and based on the ending of that, when Jigsaw died, I really didn't know how they were going to continue this thing. And I think hats off to the writers. You know, I did think they brought him back and continued him in a very effective way. Like, yes, it was in flashbacks, but it was influencing the character. It was adding to the character, it was adding to the Saw lore, to the Jigsaw character. And I appreciate it for that, because it does mean that when you watch the sequels and then you go back to the original, those moments do influence the first few films and influence the character and make you see him in a different light, which is what I really appreciate. Now, I know a lot of people don't like Saw 4, and I can absolutely see why. We're pretty much introduced to an entire new cast of characters, bar the main character. So our main character in this that goes through all the traps is Lieutenant Daniel Rigg, who featured in Saw 2 and 3. He's now the prominent character, and I think that was a logical progression to get him as the main character. He's feeling massive guilt and just paranoia, and he really is just determined to find his best friend, Detective Eric Matthews, who was in Saw 2, and we didn't really know what happened to him at the end of Saw 3. So he's going after him. That's a mystery for us. If you'd seen Saw 3 and you really didn't think they were going to bring Eric Matthews back, you pretty much thought he was dead anyway, even though they removed that scene where Amanda was meant to stab Eric Matthews. Even without that scene, you kind of implied that she kind of handled it and killed him. So I really like Daniel Rigg. Then we get our list of supporting characters in this film as well. So we get introduced to Detective Mark Hoffman, played by Costas Mandylor, who gets a hell of a lot more to do, who I'll get onto in a minute. You get Agent Peter Strom, played by Scott Patterson, and we get introduced to Jill Tuck, who is the wife, or the ex-wife, I should say, of Jigsaw. Now, the first time I watched this movie, I was incredibly confused. There's another character in the film as well called Art Blank. And the first time I watched this movie, I was trying to focus on all the different characters, getting to know their names. But most of the characters kind of look visually the same. I was constantly getting mixed up with Costas Mandylor, with Hoffman's character, Peter Strom's character, and Art Blank's, and I really struggled to know who was who. They all look very similar. They all have very similar features and kind of talk in the same way as well. And it was a very confusing first viewing experience. And actually, out of all the Saw films, Saw 4 is the one that I had to watch the most in order to understand it. When it gets to the ending, it's really clever, because although it's kind of a sequel in one way, in that you've got the autopsy scene with Jigsaw, we learn about the cassette tape with the wax on it, which was revealed in Saw 3. That actually, in the grand scheme of things, when you watch all the movies, it actually takes place in Saw 6, so it's really far down the line. And that really only serves as the only bit of sequel to Saw 3 in this film. The rest of it happens at exactly the same time. We get to the end, and one of the big twists of the film is that this is a midquel to Saw 3. I thought that was a really clever idea, because it kind of keeps Jigsaw still in the mix, because it's happening at the same time. He was still around. He planned this whole parallel series of games. And I thought that was probably a clever way. Now, with that being said, there are a few problems that I do have with Saw 4, and that being, at the end of Saw 3, in the final montage, Jigsaw says to Jeff that your daughter is still alive. She only has a limited amount of oxygen, and if you don't find her soon, you're going to have to play a game. or something like that. And then you cut to black, and then you're expecting Saw 4. Jeff is going to be the main character again, and he's going to have to try and find his daughter. Don't really get that, because by the end of the film, Peter Strom goes on a one-man mission to find out what's happening. It leads into the same place from Saw 3, and he shoots Jeff dead there and then. And I thought that was a really anticlimactic ending to the Jeff character. It feels like they kind of wiped the slate clean of all the old characters, so that moving on from this one, you can have like an entire new cast of characters. I guess it's a clean and effective way to do things, but as a fan of like what Saw 3 had set up, you kind of wanted to see more payoff to that. And unfortunately, you don't really get it. Hoffman, I'm going to get onto Hoffman in a minute. Hoffman owns his own segment. Let's talk Jill Tuck. So as we said, played by Betsy Russell, the wife of Jigsaw. I really like this backstory with the Jigsaw character, because the only backstory we'd got from him at this point was in Saw 2, where we learned that after he got cancer, he had to take his own life, survived the crash because he drove off a cliff, and then that kind of prompted him into his work. What we learned from this one is that he was expecting a child with Jill Tuck. It was all planned out meticulously. They couldn't wait to have this baby. She worked at a drug clinic for for addicts who had to go there to sort of like wean themselves away from drugs. And one night, one guy called Cecil tries to break into the clinic. And during the whole scuffle with her, she unfortunately miscarries when he slams a door on her stomach. I really like Tobin Bell's performance in this one, because you do see the trauma and just horrified nature of him, that he has lost his unborn child. Like, this was everything to him. And he is now a desperate man. He is filled with depression, not wanting to go on. And then we learn through Jill Tuck's dialogue that it was soon after this that he was diagnosed with cancer, which prompted him to take his own life. So they kind of mashed the two backstories together, and I really liked that. We also get the origin of the Billy the Puppet doll, which seems a bit throwaway in this one, because we learned that Jigsaw was an architect, like a carpenter, and built things, which is why he can build his own traps and things like that in the entire franchise. And as a gift to his unborn child, he built like this really creepy little version of the Billy the Puppet doll. No like parent would give this doll to their child. It looks absolutely terrifying. It looks like something Tim Burton forgot to create. Like, no way on God's earth. It's kind of like the Annabelle films, where they say like, oh, I've always wanted this doll, and it looks absolutely satanic and horrifying and fucked up beyond belief. No one would have this doll, especially a newborn kid. But it is an origin story nonetheless. And also we get the origin of the pig mask. We never mentioned this in the review, but throughout the previous films, when Jigsaw's kidnapping his victims, he wears a pig mask. And we get the origin of this where it was around the time he lost his child. It was Chinese New Year, and when he first captures his first ever victim, he disguised himself as a pig. He wore a pig mask in the parade during the Chinese New Year, and it was filled with chloroform. So I guess that was kind of like a symbolic thing that he used then for all his other victims. And we get the glimpse at the first ever trap that he made, which is the knife chair, which is this really crude, sort of thrown together MacGyvered kind of thing out of wood and knives. And basically the victim who killed his unborn child has to press his face through this series of interconnected knives. I think in the film he says he has to match his face with the ugliness of his soul, which is a really, really cool line. Jigsaw just gets all the cool lines in these movies. Doesn't go well for the guy. I think the trap breaks midway through, which like horribly scars him, and then he ends up in a pit of razor wire. And what's interesting is after this trap takes place, we get the reveal of the glass box trap, which is this clear glass box filled with shards of glass. And I think in the original draft of Saw 4, and again, I think there were pictures taken on set. I think the scene was filmed. This was going to be another trap in Saw 4, which didn't feature, and they pushed it back to the reveal of it for Saw 5. Originally, I think the guy meant to be in the trap, if anyone's seen Saw 4, is that there's this sort of crazy homeless guy that loiters in a hotel lobby when Rick goes in just before the bedroom trap. It was meant to be him. I don't know what this guy had done. But I think that was meant to be the scene. I swear I've seen that picture out there on the internet. If you look for it, you can probably find it. But we don't get our first look at the glass box until Saw 5, and we see what it's actually capable of and what it can do. kind of. The shards of glass in it don't really feature in it. It kind of just serves as a way out for the character, but we'll get onto that when I talk about Saw 5. Costas Mandylor as Hoffman. I love this guy. I love Costas Mandylor, and I love the character of Hoffman. Now, when I first watched this movie, I really didn't like him. He kind of gives me like a Sylvester Stallone vibe. Not that that's a bad thing. I love Sylvester Stallone. But he kind of has the, kind of thing to him. He even kind of looks like Sylvester Stallone. I swear to God. Comment below if I'm not the only one who thinks this. Like, I swear to God he does. So he's Detective Mark Hoffman. He's kind of overseeing everything, and he's really sort of like the last man standing now, especially when we get to Saw 5, who's overseeing this whole Jigsaw investigation. By the end of the film, he's revealed to be a second apprentice to Jigsaw. So Amanda was the first one, kind of, I guess you could say. We'll get to Saw 3D towards the end, where he has another one. But Hoffman really is the main apprentice who has worked with Jigsaw for a lot longer than Amanda, I think, and has been through a lot of things. However, he is kind of a loose cannon, and Jigsaw alludes to that in his tape in the autopsy scene, that Hoffman will have to be tested. But I don't know, like, Hoffman is just such a cool character. Like, as the films go on, he becomes much more of a badass. Like, in this one, he just sort of, like, gets one over on everyone, reveals himself as the new Jigsaw apprentice, locks the only eyewitness in a room. We never see him again, so it's implied that he died in that room. And I think in Saw 5, they say that there were no survivors. And then by the time we get to, like, Saw 6... he's taking on an entire police department. I think he kills like 2 of the main agents. In Saw 7, he wipes out the entire police department. This guy is just incredible. I love Hoffman. So in this one, we really only get to know that he's the new apprentice, and that's it. We get no backstory. We don't know why. That comes into it in the next film with Saw 5. So we'll get on to Saw 5 now then. I'll see if we've got any comments. No comments yet. If anyone's tuning into this or anything like this, if you're coming into it, please do leave your comments as we go through this video, because I would like to do some like Q&A or stuff at the end of this video if possible. Saw 5. Now, I have always stood up for the Saw franchise. I love the first, I love the second, love the third one. I even stood up for the fourth one. I really did enjoy that on multiple viewings. Saw 5 was the one where I was like, that was kind of the first misfire. Now, there were still some really good things in Saw 5, which I do appreciate, and we'll get onto those later. I'm going to go through the negatives first. Mark, who joined me on the podcast at the beginning of this video, kind of alluded to this in the intro, that we were desperate to see these films every year, especially with where Saw 4 left off with Hoffman, a new apprentice, new games. The games have just begun, as Jigsaw says in his tape. We wanted more. We wanted to be at that cinema. And me and Mark would plan at school in our lunch break saying, right, we're going to walk in. And I was a goody two-shoes at school. I should probably say that right off the bat. Like, I never put a foot out of line. So even going against any kinds of rules or anything like that was really out of character for me. Now I just wouldn't give a shit and I'd probably go for it. But I was thinking, like, right, we buy a ticket for another film. We find out what screen Saw 5 is playing in. We then go into the film that we were meant to. We then leave and then walk into Saw. Hopefully they don't check our tickets. What if they do check our tickets? All of these things, we were saying, go and distract one of the cinema workers, and then one of us sneaks past, and then we meet up. We were thinking of everything in the book, right? I was Googling how to sneak into a movie. All these things for Saw, because I really enjoyed it, and I really wanted that experience of seeing it firsthand. Which unfortunately I won't get to do until I see Jigsaw on Friday, even though I'm a week late on that one. Eventually we end up watching Saw 5 on the internet, and it was like, I mean, there are sites out there to watch movies when they come out. I don't endorse that, but there are. As soon as the film comes out, someone who's got a camcorder has probably recorded the movie in really shitty quality, uploaded it to the internet, and it's available to watch. So we were desperate to see this movie, and the plot was already on Wikipedia. We didn't want to read it. We wanted to watch the movie first. It was in such bad quality. Like, you could barely make out the audio. There were only a few shots that you could really see clearly. Saw's just a naturally dark movie, right? So you can't really see what's going on a camcorder, like recorded footage on a camcorder. But by God, we tried. We sat through the entire film on the internet, barely seeing a thing. The camera was moving all over the place. You couldn't see anything. You could make out a bit of the audio. We were essentially having to read the Wikipedia plot as it went along and sort of like matched it up to the audio. So it was the worst Saw viewing experience I'd ever watched. So I don't know if that had a knock on with my opinion on the film, but I really don't have that great of opinion on the film. It's a necessary film because it does go into a lot of the backstory of Hoffman's character, and we do get some really cool Jigsaw scenes in there as well. But beyond that, this is really a bad Saw film. This is going back to the whole group, the group traps sequences, essentially. Like, you've got a whole room full of people who are meant to work together, who won't work together, who will all be picked off by the end of the movie. You don't really get enough time to develop anyone. The most interesting guy is going to be killed first. In Saw 5, there's a British guy who I'm trying to find the name of. Let's have a look here, see if I can find it. In the film, he says he works for the UK newspaper company, The Herald. And that's it. And we don't get to know any more of him. Like, he's a really interesting character. He seems to know about everyone. He's this really sarcastic character who's like back chatting to them all and seems to know everything, seems really savvy of what's going on. And then he's killed in like the second room. And then all the other characters are unlikable as fuck and you don't give a shit. That's really my biggest problem with this film, is the whole trap thing. And of course you've got to have traps in a Saw movie, but really, if you were editing this movie, you could remove all the traps and just have it as Peter Strahm going on this one-man mission to try and uncover the identity of Hoffman and uncovering more backstory of the Jigsaw character. If you just edited it to those scenes, it's probably about half hour. You could have probably tacked that onto the end of Saw 4, because Saw 4 is quite a short film. I think it's about 90 minutes. Maybe it would have felt weird to then shift and continue it with Peter Strahm, but it really doesn't feel like... it doesn't. Sorry, there was just a comment that came up on the screen there, just kind of diverted my attention. I don't know if that would have felt weird to then shift the focus to Peter Strahm. It would have felt like two movies mashed together, which essentially it would have been. But it doesn't feel like there's enough material in Saw 5 to warrant it. Like, the traps are pointless. Even down to the fact where Jigsaw has died at this point. He died at the end of Saw 3. Saw 4 happened at the same time as Saw 3. So he would have had to have set all these traps up for Saw 3, as well as setting up a sub-game, giving all the setup to Hoffman. Like, Hoffman would have had to have gone and set all these traps up. Jigsaw would have had to have oversaw it all to set all the traps up for Saw 4, which happens at the same time. And now there's like a whole other series of traps for the guys in Saw 5. Like, nah. Like, as a detective at the police department, Hoffman would not have had anywhere near enough time to set all this shit up. So this is the point where the series really gets to the realm of possibility. Like, how much time would he have had to set all these things up? I guess you could say that for all the Saw films, but really this is sort of where it compounds on itself, especially because we're at the stage now where pretty much since Saw 2, or especially Saw 3, they really do kind of follow on right after one another as one big, long, connected series of events. So the positive stuff for Saw 5, sorry, I do love the backstory of Hoffman. We learn why he became an apprentice to Jigsaw, and we learn that his sister was killed, and no one really did anything about it. I think the guy was let off on a technicality in the film, so he took matters into his own hands. He went out as a one-man vigilante, and he put the guy who killed his sister in a trap and made it look like Jigsaw killed him. Jigsaw doesn't like this. He doesn't like being credited for work that wasn't his, especially inferior work. And he kidnaps Hoffman, and he basically gives him an ultimatum. He kind of puts him in a trap. It's more of a test. And from then on, he says that, look, if you don't work for... He kind of blackmails him, essentially, which is really out of character for Jigsaw. He says, if you don't work for me and help me continue my work and essentially do what you did to the guy that killed your sister, but do it in a way where people can learn from it, people can escape the trap, people can rehabilitate themselves from it. Rehabilitate, like not counting all the years of therapy they need after one of these traps. If you don't work for me, I'm going to tell the entire police department you're history, what you did, that it was you. I have the proof, I have the evidence, and that's your career gone. You're going to be in jail for the rest of your life. So Hoffman kind of joins him for that reason alone. And we get some really neat flashbacks, actually, to see how they set up many of the traps from the first Saw film. And I think we get one from Saw 3 as well. Or was that the one from Saw 6? I don't know. But we essentially go back to the razor wire trap from Saw 1. We see how they kidnap the guy. We see the trap in effect, essentially, and what Hoffman learns from it. And we learn that he was the one that took the pen light from Dr. Gordon. He took the pen light and planted it on Dr. Gordon to get the authorities and the detective on his trail. So again, scenes that influence stuff from Saw 1 make you see it a different light when you watch them all together again, which is what I really like about the Saw franchise. Which brings us to the very end. If I'm going to go into a favorite trap from this film, it's probably the ending trap. I really don't care about the main series of connected traps in this film. It's a whole about that you've got like a housing developer, and you've got that they burnt down a building with so many people in. They killed so many people inside. They tried to cover it up because one person was trying to sell the house. One person was the journalist trying to make a quick buck off it and get a story out there. It's this really like thrown together reason why they did it, which originally was going to tie into Saw 1 again. In Saw 1, there's a moment where they hear a fire alarm in the distance during one of Jigsaw's tapes, and that was originally going to link into Saw 5, where the house that they burnt was actually the fire bell that you can hear from the first Saw film, which would have still been bullshit, but I would have liked that connection a little bit more. They never make it explicit in the film. I think that was the original idea in the behind the scenes and the writers team, which sadly never came to fruition. But my favorite trap of the film, and I do love this ending to the film, is that Peter Strahm finally corners Hoffman. He's got him. He's got him in the room. In the middle of the room is this glass box, which was the same glass box that was revealed in Saw 4. And Strahm plays the tape saying that, just walk away, forget everything you've seen, get into the box, pain will be incurred, but you'll have a chance to escape and be safe. He doesn't trust the tape. He doesn't trust Hoffman. He doesn't trust Jigsaw. So when he has a fight with Hoffman, he throws him into this glass box, slams the lid, and he thinks he's got one over on Hoffman. He thinks that he's killed him. He's threw him into his own trap, and now Hoffman's going to die a horrible, horrible, painful death. Unbeknownst to Strahm, this is not the case because Hoffman anticipated that Strahm would do this, and it turns out that the walls start to close in, kind of like the trash compactor scene, actually very much like the trash compactor scene from the original Star Wars movie. The walls start to close in ever so slowly. The glass box lowers into the ground to safety as the walls go over it, and Strahm is crushed to death as the film comes to a close. It's a very brutal ending. I really do like the ending, actually, although it's a shame that Peter Strahm died, especially because he got so close to uncovering the identity of Hoffman, that he was the Jigsaw accomplice. And boom, that takes us into and sets us up for Saw 6. Now, we get to Saw 6, and this is actually my second favorite in the franchise. I was really pleasantly surprised by Saw 6. Maybe because Saw 5 really took a backseat for me. That's where I felt like the drag shoot of the series was really let loose. And Saw 6 really just kind of like hit it home for me. We get a change of director as well. I should have said for Saw 5, we had a new director of David Hackle. But for Saw 6, we get the editor of the series, Kevin Groider, who directs Saw 6 and Saw 7. We'll get on to Saw 7 in a minute because I do have a lot of problems with Saw 3D, but Saw 6 is definitely my second favorite. So a bit of backstory about the history of this one. Saw was making a steady profit as the films went on, a declining profit nonetheless, but it was still making a decent profit, which is why it was still bringing the audiences in, which is why they kept making them. But we hit Saw 6, and during this time, the Paranormal Activity films were rife at the box office. The whole found footage thing really came back with Paranormal Activity 1. Everyone flocked to the cinema to see that movie, and I think that Paranormal Activity, although we had found footage horror movies before, like Blair Witch Project, like many other films as well, it really did just captivate audiences, and it was something new. It was something different that they hadn't seen in a while. It was a different change of pace. Saw kind of hit its stride because people knew what to expect. They knew they were going to get traps. They knew that they were going to get gore and people were going to die, and you were going to kind of get a twist ending, which would probably set you up for the next one. Audiences had come to expect everything they could from the Saw franchise, and it had kind of ran as far as it could, really. So they were moving to other films like The Paranormal Activity. And there's a great interview, actually, with Costas Mandylor where he's talking about that. I think it might be a Saw 3D interview, actually. He says that show up for Saw, let's kick Paranormal Activity's ass, and let's make another one. So it really didn't strike. It wasn't like down to they've got an intricate plot that they want to tell or a story or anything like that. It really was just made for money, essentially, at this point. And they were saying, you know, we need to get enough money so that we can keep making more, probably to keep Costas Mandylor in work, in all honesty. This one was done on a budget of $11 million. It made 68.2, which I believe at the time was the worst gross for a Saw film at the box office, which was a real shame because I really do enjoy this one. I think at this time as well, there was a whole thing to do with like healthcare reform and things like that going on in the government in the US. And this film is very much catered towards that. It definitely is a commentary on the whole healthcare thing, how unfair it can be in terms of like insurance companies, like healthcare insurance, and which clients they choose to go with, which ones they favor. That's essentially the entire plot of this one. And they do kind of hit that message a little bit too hard. It's about as subtle as a sledgehammer to the head, but it's a neat backdrop for the film, I think. Now, it's been a while since I've seen Saw 6, so you're going to have to bear with me on this one. So really the main crux of this story is, yes, you do have Jigsaw in there, and we learn that his healthcare was turned down by the main guy who goes through a series of traps in this one. But what I like about the traps in this film more than most of the other Saw films is that, one, it's played very well by the main guy, and indeed most of the people in the traps are really, really good. But we also get a bit of history with him. Like, we see his work life, we see him as a character interacting with all these people at his workplace, all his colleagues. Like, he has rapport with some. They're all kind of like despicable human beings, but he has that workplace mentality with them all. They are all colleagues at his workplace. So you get like little brief scenes of that where you see them interacting, which really does set up for all the traps. Like, it gives you a little bit of history. Not a lot. This isn't Shakespeare by any stretch of the imagination, but it's enough. And that's an ingredient that I don't think has been very prominent in the other Saw films. You're kind of just watching people that are all going to get killed. And you kind of do in this movie too, but there's that little inkling of humanity to them in this one, and that he's having to choose who survives, sort of bringing his own algorithm, his healthcare policy into effect with his own colleagues. And actually sort of like the fallout of like the end of the traps when it's revealed like this person is going to die now. For example, the best trap in this film, hands down, is the carousel trap. It was released as a clip ahead of the film before it came out, and it's the one that everyone talks about. It's the main one. It's on like the goddamn poster for this movie, where 6 people are strapped to a carousel. Only 2 people can survive, and only he can pick which 2 survive. And it's essentially like a Russian roulette, like, really, of who's going to survive. And when it gets to the last 2, and he saves the last person, and what that one person knows he's going to die, it's this really heartbreaking moment, and it's played fantastically, and it's really believable. And it just seems that at the end of all the traps in Saw 6, there is somewhat of an impact to it. The opening trap is completely ridiculous and over the top, but that was just to get everyone back in the mindset for a Saw movie. And it's really over the top and gory and completely ridiculous. But all the other traps in the movie, I do really like. And it's just a real shame that, unfortunately, at the end, the main guy dies. It always seems to be the case in these films where they learn something or they don't learn something, but they're killed anyway. And the next movie, we don't get any kind of reference back to them or anything like that. It's sort of like, right, that's served for that movie, move on to the next one. And that's always a problem for me, because I really did like his character. You did want to see him learn from this. You did want to see the people he goes up against learn from this. And unfortunately, they don't. And it always seems to be the case with these movies, because we've just got to see more people die. The final trap that the guy finds himself in is one that involves hydrochloric acid. I think that's what it's called. Let me just have a look. Hydrofluoric acid, sorry. And it was interesting because, as I said, when we were at school, I had a bunch of friends. We all loved these Saw movies, and actually saw the first movie is one that I do tend to show a lot of people. If someone says they haven't seen Saw, I always like to show them it just to see what their reaction is to the ending, because when it hits that ending, I'm pretty much just watching their reaction more than the film itself, because I want people to feel what I feel, what I felt, sorry, when I first watched that Saw movie. So, me and my group of friends at school, we were like always speculating of which traps were going to feature, which ones we'd seen before, which ones we would like to see, and which like things they hadn't done before. And it was like, well, they haven't really done an acid trap. Like there was the one where Kerry had to like dunk her hand into that acid to pick the key out, but in terms of a trap that involved completely acid, and me and my friend said, like, wouldn't it be great if there was one involving hydrofluoric acid, which is like one of the strongest acids in the world, like it can eat through anything. Like we were thinking, like there's probably going to be a trap with that, and lo and behold, we see the film eventually, and there's hydrofluoric acid in it. It was this huge coincidence. So maybe the writing team heard our conversations at school and decided to take an idea for it. I don't know, but I thought that was a cool aside anyway. What I love about this film is Hoffman's story. Now, I talked about how Hoffman in the fourth movie, he's kind of just revealed as the apprentice. In the fifth one, you get his backstory. In this one, you see how desperate he is to hide his identity. Like, although Strom's dead, there's a whole investigation going on into Strom's death and how did he die, what was he trying to investigate, and all these things. And it essentially comes down to, they know that Hoffman's the bad guy. They know that Hoffman is the new apprentice. They just need to get the evidence. And there's a fantastic moment in the film where they find his tape. They find Jigsaw's tape that was recorded, but it was actually Hoffman's voice when he killed the guy who murdered his sister. He changed the voice, he altered it to make it sound like Jigsaw. But the police have got it, and they're doing like all like digital encryption on it and like changing the pitch to try and work out who the original voice on the tape was. And they call Hoffman to the station. And right there, he knows he's fucked. He knows that they're onto him, that they're going to uncover him then and there. It's a shame they didn't have any kind of backup on standby. It's kind of just a room of like the woman on the computer trying to encrypt it, and then you've got the two agents there. So Hoffman goes there, and they're like being all really quizzical, like, oh, isn't it strange that, you know, someone else recorded their voice and not Jigsaw? And they're being all really coy about it. And Hoffman's like playing it off. He's pacing around the room. He's checking his watch. He's like getting a cup of coffee and pretending to be that it's nothing. And then he like murders them. Like he stabs them to death really brutally. He burns the entire police department down and escapes. And this is why I love Hoffman, because it just gets to the point where he's completely out of his depth, and he is going to do anything to clear his name. He is going to do anything to get out of there, even if it means burning down an entire police department. I'm not really sure what he does with the cameras. I think he kills the power at one point in the film to hide his identity. I've talked death on Saw 6 at the moment, but it really, really is a solid film in terms of how imaginative the traps get, how it advances the story. And there's also a scene in here which does link into a Saw 7. Like, they did leave it open-ended, but I own all the Saw films apart from Saw 7 because I really, really hate that movie. And I think that Saw 6 is by far the best conclusion to the series. It ties everything up. It kind of comes full circle. And even if you just leave it at the last shot, like, that would be a great ending for the Saw franchise. Unfortunately, they had to make a Saw 7. The one other little bit of information as well I wanted to talk about in this film is that one of the longest running mysteries in the entire Saw franchise was that Amanda received a letter in Saw 3. And she reads it and she kind of breaks down in hysterical tears. And you never knew what was in that letter, or what was in it, what prompted her to read it, or... Well, she finds this letter in the drawer, essentially, in Saw 3, and she reads it, breaks down into tears, and then that was all we knew. Like, we didn't know what the contents were. We finally find out what the contents of that letter are in Saw 6, which is a really cool way. I think it's probably the best twist they could have done. The letter was written by Hoffman, who says that he knows the history of Amanda in that she was present at the time that Jigsaw lost his unborn child. She was with Cecil the day he broke into the clinic and killed Jigsaw's child. And she's covered this up, and he says that you've got to kill Jill, who was one of the victims in Saw 3, Otherwise, I'm going to tell Jigsaw what you did, which would absolutely destroy him. So it's a real, like, nice bit of information for the Amanda character, and kind of makes you go back to Saw 3 and watch it in a whole other way. She did what she did to protect Jigsaw so that he didn't know that she was implicated in his unborn child's murder. And when you look at it that way, by the end of Saw 3, Amanda is like a really, really sympathetic character. Like, she's a horrible character, but she does get that moment of sympathy and humanity towards the end, and that's all stems from Saw 6 and having that great twist. Absolutely inspired idea from whoever came up with that. I really do like that. Although, if you're a stickler for a continuity, if you do go back to Saw 3, Jigsaw says that I've left a letter for you in the drawer, which implies that he wrote the letter and he left it there, which he clearly didn't. It was Hoffman's, so maybe he knew that there was a letter there and Hoffman switched it for his own. I have no idea. And also, when you see Amanda open the letter in Saw 3, it's like this whole bunch of paper, like, I don't know if it's like medical notes or something like that. There's like a whole wedge of paper in there. But when we get to Saw 6 and she opens it, it's just like one sheet of paper. So there is a bit of a continuity error there if you are watching them. But if you can ignore that and you can just see it as what it is, I think it's a great twist. In a Saw first as well, there's also a post-credit scene in Saw 6, which unfortunately never really gets any payoff. And I think it was meant to have a big payoff. So the film ends after the credits, a flashback to right before Amanda died. She's walking through the corridors and she goes to the cell where Jeff Daughter's being kept. And she says, "Don't trust the one who saves you." And eventually, when we get to Saw 5, Hoffman is the one who saves her. So I don't know if in some kind of original draft it was going to be that the little girl essentially saves the day. Like, she tells the police that this woman told me not to trust this guy, and that led to their investigation and uncovering Hoffman. There's loads of possibilities of where it could have gone. But unfortunately, it's kind of like this weird scene that never gets any kind of payoff, which is a shame. And I think that's the biggest case with Saw 3D, which I'll get onto now. Saw 7, Saw the final chapter, Saw 3D, whatever you want to call it. Well, I guess it's not the final chapter now, right, with Jigsaw coming out. So that's kind of hilarious that they called it that. It's not the only horror franchise to have an entry in the series called the final chapter. If we look at the Friday the 13th movies, wasn't part 4 the final chapter? And then they made 10 of those movies, not including the remake or the reboot, whatever it is. I hated Saw 3. Sorry, Saw 3D. I hated it. It was billed as the last one. Obviously, the last chapter. This is the final Saw movie, so it was big. And it was in this time where 3D was booming at the box office. All horror films were getting ported into 3D. And Saw was getting in on that 3D craze as well. Probably in a ploy to make more money, because Saw 6 didn't do all that great at the box office. They probably wanted like a big boost for it. So they put it in 3D. And it's not immersive 3D. It's as just the classic horror cliche Friday the 13th part 3D. It's like throwing stuff into the camera. It's like someone's eyes bulging out and the eyes like popping out into the camera. It's really cringeworthy stuff like that. And I could probably tell from the trailer that this film wasn't going to be great. It was a brand new character. It was a whole new series of traps. It was just everything like that. It felt very run-of-the-mill. It was like, been there, done that. Now we've got a whole new character that we've got to introduce for the last film. And also because of me, like, I love the ongoing story of Saw. And I always kept thinking when we got to Saw 7, like, did we need another new character to be introduced? Can't we take this time to finish the story and go back and answer some of the unanswered questions? What happened to Gordon? What happened to Gordon's family? And I'll talk about that in a minute. What happened to the victims that survived throughout the Saw films? What happened to the ones that died? Like, what happened? There was still loads of questions left up in the air. And really, none of them get answered. And that's one of my biggest... In fact, this one probably raises more questions than it answers. Also, the overall tone of the films, although it's always been very tongue-in-cheek, this one takes that to the absolute next degree. The acting is absolutely piss-poor in this film. Right from the opening trap, I knew that this was going to be bad. The opening trap is this girl who's cheated on these two guys being lowered down, and these guys with a razor blade in the middle have to kind of kill each other on either side, or they can just leave the blade there so that it kills the woman. Like, Jigsaw is now putting people, or Hoffman, I guess, is putting people in traps just because someone cheated on someone in a relationship. Like, I mean, if he was going to put people in a trap for doing that all the time, it'd be like probably most of the population of the world, right? Like, what does that have to do with not appreciating your life? That is just something that naturally happens in life to a lot of people. Like, it's just stuff like that. And the traps themselves as well, although they've always been like larger than life, completely ridiculous in every stretch of the imagination in the other Saw films, these ones are just like really impractical in terms of what happens in them. So, for example, or just stupid, like there's an easy way you could figure out of them, but the characters are so dumb that they can't think of it. There's one where a guy is blindfolded and he's sort of like standing above in the rafters of a big warehouse building with planks of wood, and he's got to navigate his way across the wood to get a key to unlock this noose that's around his neck. Otherwise, if he falls off, he hangs himself and he's dead. He, like, the guy who's going through these traps sort of shouts from the opposite side directions, like, move along the plank of wood to your left, like, keep going straight on. When he could easily walk out into the middle, take the key, throw the key to the guy, and he can unlock the collar. But he doesn't think to do that, and of course the guy dies. There's another one where the main guy in the film finds out that to get into a combination to unlock a door, there is, to get to the numbers for the code, essentially for the combination, they're tattooed on the roots of his teeth. So he has to take a plier, rip his teeth out to find which number they are to program it into the door. If that's the case, like, that means that his teeth have been ripped out earlier that day to put the number on them. His teeth would then be pushed back in. Why would he struggle to rip them out with a plier? His teeth would be in absolute agony. If his teeth were ripped out to put a number on them, to then be put back into his mouth, you know, like, they would be falling out, like, he'd have no teeth. His mouth would be in absolutely excruciating pain the whole movie. He wouldn't be able to talk. Stuff like that. It's really, really bullshit. Excuse me. So the main plot of this film is the main guy has written a self-help book, and he leads these groups of Jigsaw survivors as sort of like a therapy group. And he has this story of how he had this trap where he had to put these metal hooks through his pectoral muscles and hoist himself up into the ceiling. He survived. He's had this whole new outlook on life. He's married the love of his life, and now he's leading this self-help group to help other victims of the Saw traps. And right there, we get introduced to Dr. Gordon again. Cary Elwes comes back. We haven't seen him since the first Saw film. People have been speculating on what happened to Dr. Gordon for so long. He comes back. But he's not the Dr. Gordon you remember. He's playing it very dark. He's very grizzled. He talks in a gravelly voice. And they actually revealed him in the trailers as well, which I thought was a really bad move. Like, that would have been a genuine, like, jaw-dropping moment, seeing Dr. Gordon come back. But they just showed it in all the trailers, so all the suspense was there. And as soon as you see how he plays it, you know there's more to this guy. You know he's probably going to be a bad guy or has something to do with Jigsaw now, just from the really, like, over-the-top evil way that he plays it. But we get to the end of the film, and sort of the end goal for the main guy is to rescue his wife, who's in this giant brazen bull. Like, she's about to be lit on fire, and, like, the flames getting higher in the brazen bull. If her husband doesn't get to her in time and complete his test, then she's going to be burnt alive. Of course, this happens at the end. Like, he fails his trap when he could have easily have found a way to complete it, and she's burnt alive. What's bullshit, though, is because she didn't know that this guy faked and, like, pretended to be in a Saw trap, and, like, create this whole empire and financial empire that he's created with his book that he's selling and his self-help group. She genuinely loved this guy and didn't know that he'd lied, so it just seems really mean-spirited when they kill her at the end, because she didn't do anything wrong, and that really doesn't fit Saw's MO. It's always put someone in a trap who's done something wrong, and she hadn't done anything wrong, and that really, really annoyed me when I first watched the film, because she was a really sweet character, and then they just give her this horrible treatment at the end. I thought it was absolutely bullshit. Most of the film in this one, we're introduced to yet another FBI agent who's kind of chasing everyone. He's played terribly in this movie. I just pretty much hate everything about this movie. It felt like a really unnecessary conclusion. Again, the best thing in this movie, hands down, is Hoffman, because we see him get even more and more extreme, trying to kill Jill Tuck in this one. Like, he's basically just trying to tie up loose ends, kind of like the writers of this film. They're trying to just tie up all the loose ends, and that's essentially what Hoffman's doing this entire movie. Jill Tuck is having visions that Hoffman is trying to kill her in a really over-the-top and stupid go-kart dream sequence. I mean, we've got dream sequences now, for God's sake, in a Saw movie. Like, can you get any more ridiculous than this? And not just that, but like the color palette of the film looks really off as well. And I think that has a lot to do with the 3D. It feels a lot more brighter, more overexposed, a lot more cheaper. And I think that's because when you were meant to put the glasses on, it was going to darken everything and it was going to make it look more like the other Saw films. But when you watch this thing in 2D, it's downright laughable. Like, just the stuff coming at the camera, it looks really cheesy. And that's the best way I can describe this film. It's cheesy, and it's not really cheesy in a good way. If you're just going into this film just wanting a cheesy horror movie or cheesy gore fest with really bad performances and cringeworthy things like that, you might like it. But if you've been a long-running fan of the Saw films, which I have since the first one, you're going to be let down by this one because it really doesn't add anything. And Jigsaw as well, Tobin Bell, the one saving grace of this entire franchise, is relegated to about a 1-minute flashback in this film. And it's a bullshit flashback as well. It doesn't really have anything to do with anything. His absence is really felt in this movie because he's really been the anchor of this whole franchise up until this point. Getting to know more about his character, his psychology about things, his skewed take on morality. And it's just absent in this film. It's basically just trap after trap after trap. And they're boring, and the characters you don't care about, and the traps are ridiculous, and just there's no stakes to this film, especially it being the last Saw film. I really wanted more from this. Which brings us to the ending. So we get to the final scene where Hoffman is kidnapped by 3 pigmen. One reveals himself to be Dr. Gordon. Big shocker, the big twist of this film is that Dr. Gordon, the guy who was in the bathroom trap in the first film, has been working with Jigsaw since the events of Saw 1, all throughout the franchise, helping him set everything up. He's been his medical advisor. He's been helping him do the more surgically intricate traps. And he locks Hoffman in the bathroom, throws away the hacksaw. It's kind of a nice bookend to the first film, I'll give it that, but there's no way for Hoffman to escape, essentially, and it's game over, slams the door, and that's the end of the film. But when you break it down and you try, if you've been invested in this story, I've completely lost my thought now, guys. I've been talking for such a long time. The writers of this film said before this film came out that the ending of Saw 7 would be, you wouldn't be able to guess it. It was, you will not guess how it ends. The twist ending to this film is going to be incredible. It's going to rock everyone's world. But Dr. Gordon being an accomplice was like a theory that was floating around since the first Saw movie. Like, people who watched that movie, even when it ended, have always thought that he had a part in it. There was a shot in Saw 2 where you see some camera footage of Jigsaw, who we thought was Jigsaw at the time, putting a key behind someone's eye, and you see him kind of like drag his foot and limp, and people thought maybe that's Dr. Gordon with his busted up foot that he cut off in Saw 1. This theory's been everywhere. So when you get to Saw 7 and that's the end, you know, it felt like they just did it to appease fans, like it was a long-running fan theory, and they just ran with it like they couldn't think of anything better to do. But it doesn't make any sense because, like, Gordon had a family, he had a wife, he had a daughter who he was trying to get back to. Like, the whole crux of him in that trap in Saw 1 was that he was trying to get out to get back to his family, to protect them. There's no mention of them here. We don't know if he's split up with his wife. We don't know what happened to his daughter. We don't know if he's still with them and he's kind of doing this Jigsaw thing as an aside. We don't even really know why he's working with Jigsaw. Like, it seemed like he was pretty much against Jigsaw and he wanted to kill him. Jigsaw sort of saves him after the first trap, brings him back to health, and then sends him out back into the world and says that, you know, I'll let you go, but you need to help me with all my traps and all of my work. And when the time comes, if Jill Tuck is killed, you need to act and put Hoffman in a trap and basically keep him there. Why would he do that? Why would he agree to that? Why would he not tell everyone about what happened to him in that bathroom, about Jigsaw? He knows his identity. He should realize that it was the patient he was working on, John Kramer. There are so many plot holes when it comes to Saw 7. And I mean, at least now we have Jigsaw, so this will be continuing on the story. I've heard rumors that Dr. Gordon's not going to be in it, though, so it won't be continuing that, which is a shame. But Saw did not deserve this kind of closure that it got with Saw 7. It really didn't, which is why I'm glad that Jigsaw's come back now. As I say, I haven't seen the movie yet. I'll be seeing it on Friday, and I'll have a review out on Friday as well. I'm really looking forward to it. It's probably one of my most anticipated films of the year. But Saw 7 really absolutely gutted me, to the point where if I'm showing people the Saw franchise, I always tend to end at 6 and then maybe show them like the end 10 minutes of Saw 7. And that's really all I can talk about with the Saw films. I think I've pretty much covered everything. I have been talking for an outrageous amount of time on these films. But yeah, so final thoughts on Saw, regardless of like its negatives, and it does have negatives, don't get me wrong, this is not like, I've said, like, it's not Shakespeare, it's not meant to be overly complex and everything like that. But in terms of like the modern state of horror movies or thriller films, I really did like the interconnected story. And I thought, if you're looking at other horror films that it came out against, it was definitely a cut above the rest. It had its own style. Oh, one thing I didn't even mention as well, how can I forget this? The soundtrack. Charlie Klaus's music to this entire franchise, especially the final Saw theme, is probably one of my favorite pieces of music ever written. Every time that song kicks in, the track's called Hello Zepp, you feel the goosebumps, you feel the adrenaline kicking in, you're waiting for that twist to happen, and it really does just set you on edge of what's to come. So the music's incredible. I've heard the soundtrack to the new Saw film, and I know that the song comes back into it at the end of Jigsaw. I can't wait to hear that on the big screen at the ending of that film. God knows what the ending to Jigsaw is going to be. But final thoughts on the Saw franchise. This is an important film series to me. Like, if I go back to school, like, I've met some of my best friends now through Saw. It's something we still talk about. It's a film series that I'm still sharing with newcomers. My best friend's girlfriend came over with him, and we watched the first Saw movie. She'd never seen it before, and now she wants to watch all the others. So it is kind of this, you know, it is a franchise that you can let people into and share with, and that's a sign of a good movie right there, in my opinion. True, the first film, you can look at it, it's on its own thing. You don't have to watch the sequels. But in terms of like of this being an anthology thing where they crank these things out every year, I think you could honestly do much worse. And with all the flashbacks that you get in the later sequels and how it ties back to the first ones and makes you see it in a different way, I think that's really clever. And I really didn't care about the traps or the gore. That was never what I was invested in with Saw. It was the character of Jigsaw, and it was this interconnected story. It was these twist endings that would set you up for the next one and make you keep coming back every year to watch the next one. We've had a 7-year wait, but now Jigsaw's back. As I said, I'll be seeing that on Friday. Cannot wait for that film. I really don't know how that's going to do at the box office. I don't know if people are completely just done with Saw at this point, or if it's going to surprise us all and it will sort of start this new trend. Maybe we'll get a Jigsaw 2, Jigsaw 3, and it'll be this whole new series to carry on from the Saw legacy. But no, I'm glad I've watched these movies, and I'm glad that finally I've had a chance to talk about it in my very rambly, non-structured way. So power to you guys if you've made it to the end of the video. But that'll do it for my review on the Saw franchise, Saw 1 to 7. Be sure to comment, subscribe, let us know what you thought of the franchise. Which is your favorite? Who's your favorite character? Which is your favorite trap? Have you seen Jigsaw? Are you still waiting to see it? Anything Saw related, please do drop us a comment. My voice is completely gone at this point. I've probably been talking for about 2 hours, so I'm going to sign the video off now. Once again, happy Halloween, guys. Have a very safe and fun Halloween. Watch some horror movies. Let me know which horror movies you're watching this Halloween as well. Yeah, there's loads of movie reviews coming out this week that I'm going to be a part of. So I'll be on a review for Breathe, which is the new Andy Serkis directed movie. There'll be a review for Jigsaw, as I said, on Friday. There's Murder on the Orient Express, and also Death of Stalin comes out for me at my local theatre on Friday, which I'm also going to try and get to see. There'll be more reaction videos from me as well later down the line. So as I said, hit that subscribe button, share, spread the word of Cinema Savvy, because we do want to get as many followers now as we can. We're bringing out content as regularly as we can. But yeah, no, this has been a pleasure talking about these movies. And until the next video, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.